My aunt sold my mother's jewelry the same week we buried her. Not secretly. Not quietly. She walked into that house with a cloth bag, while I was still wearing the black dress from the funeral, and picked up every piece my mother had owned like she was shopping at a yard sale. When I asked her what she was doing, she looked at me the way you look at a stray dog that has wandered into a clean kitchen, not with cruelty exactly, but with a complete absence of consideration. These things belong to the family now, she said. You were never really part of this family anyway. I was 19 years old. My mother had been dead for 6 hours. But before I tell you what happened 8 years later when that same aunt stood at my door with her hands shaking and her pride finally cracked open, let me take you back to a small town in Georgia called Millbrook, where I learned that some families love their children and some families only love what those children can prove. My name is Reese Dalton. I grew up in Millbrook, Georgia. A town so small that the gas station and the post office shared a parking lot, and everybody knew your grandmother's maiden name. It was the kind of place that felt safe from the outside and suffocating from the inside, where family reputation meant everything and the truth meant considerably less. My mother, Joanna Dalton, was the quiet one in her family. She had 3 sisters, Patricia, the oldest, who ran everything, Donna, the middle one, who agreed with everything Patricia said, and Carol, the youngest, who was too afraid to disagree with anyone. My mother was somewhere in between all of them, softer than Patricia, smarter than Donna, braver than Carol, and therefore trusted by none of them. She had me when she was 22 alone, after a man named Curtis Webb decided that fatherhood was not something he had time for. She never chased him. She never complained. She simply folded his absence into her life the way you fold a difficult truth into your daily routine. Quietly, without drama, and with complete determination to make it irrelevant. We lived in a small house on the eastern edge of Millbrook, the kind that needed constant small repairs. A loose porch step, a kitchen faucet that dripped, a back door that stuck in the summer heat. My mother fixed all of it herself, slowly on weekends, with a toolbox she had inherited from her own father and a stubbornness that I have spent my whole life trying to learn from. She worked as a bookkeeper for a local hardware store. She was precise and careful with money in the way that people are when they have never had enough of it. She kept a budget notebook on the kitchen counter and reviewed it every Sunday morning with coffee. When I was old enough to understand numbers, she taught me how to read it. She said, "Reese, knowing where your money goes is knowing where your life goes. Never let anyone else hold that information for you." I did not understand then how important that lesson would become. Her family, Patricia and the sisters, lived in the larger, older houses on the west side of Millbrook. Patricia had married a man named Douglas Hargrove who sold insurance and sat on the town council, and shook hands with everyone at church. They had 2 sons, Tyler and Ryan, who played baseball and got their pictures in the local paper, and were discussed at every family gathering like evidence of something Patricia had personally accomplished. My mother and I attended those gatherings. We sat at the table and ate the food and participated in the conversations. But I noticed, even as a small child, that we were included the way a footnote is included in a document, technically present, not really the point. Patricia referred to my mother as poor Joanna, in a tone that was not sympathetic. She referred to me as the girl in conversations where every other child was called by name. When Tyler got a baseball scholarship to a state university, Patricia called every relative individually to share the news. When I won a full academic scholarship to Georgia State at 17, the first person in the family to earn one, Patricia said at Sunday dinner, "Well, that's nice for Reese." Of course, academics and real life are very different things. My mother squeezed my hand under the table. I felt her rings against my fingers, 3 of them simple gold bands she wore on her right hand, that had belonged to her own mother. She never said anything about Patricia's comment, but her hand was warm and steady in mine, and that was enough. She got sick my freshman year of college. Quietly, the way she did everything, she noticed something wrong, went to a doctor, came home with information she spent a week processing before she called me. Ovarian cancer, stage 2. Treatable but serious. She said it the same way she said everything, difficult, directly, without decoration, with a plan already forming. I drove home every weekend. I sat with her through chemotherapy appointments that left her exhausted and thin. I watched her lose the hair she had always kept in a neat dark braid down her back and watched her tie colorful scarves around her head instead, and still go to work on Mondays because the hardware store needed its books kept and she needed the insurance. Patricia visited twice during the treatment. Both times she spent more of the visit talking about Tyler's baseball career than asking about my mother's health. Both times she left within an hour. My mother never said a word against her sister. That was one of her qualities that I have always found both admirable and heartbreaking. She refused to speak badly of people who had earned it 100 times over. She said once, when I was 16 and furious about something Patricia had said at a holiday dinner, "Reese, people who need to make themselves bigger by making others smaller are already living their punishment. You don't have to add to it." I tried to believe her. I am still trying. She recovered from the first round. Then it came back. Then she recovered again. Then it came back a third time, and this time the doctors used words like aggressive and limited in options. I transferred back to a university closer to home. I got a part-time job. I reorganized my whole life around being near her, and I did not regret a single rearrangement. The last year of her life she was mostly at home. I was there every day. I learned her medication schedule, her dietary restrictions, which positions were comfortable and which ones hurt, what kind of music she wanted in the mornings and what kind of silence she needed in the afternoons. I became fluent in the specific language of caring for someone you love who is leaving. Her sisters visited infrequently. Patricia sent a casserole once. Donna called on birthdays. Carol sent a card with a Bible verse that my mother read and set aside without comment. In those last months my mother talked to me about a lot of things. About her life, about her choices, about what she hoped for me. She talked about the jewelry, 3 gold bands from her mother, a pair of pearl earrings she had saved for 3 years to buy herself for her 30th birthday, a small diamond pendant that had belonged to her grandmother. She told me she had written down her wishes clearly. She told me everything that was hers was meant for me. She told me she had talked to a lawyer and signed papers and that I should not worry. My aunt sold my mother's jewelry the same week we buried her. Not secretly. Not quietly. She walked into that house with a cloth bag, while I was still wearing the black dress from the funeral, and picked up every piece my mother had owned like she was shopping at a yard sale. When I asked her what she was doing, she looked at me the way you look at a stray dog that has wandered into a clean kitchen, not with cruelty exactly, but with a complete absence of consideration. "These things belong to the family now," she said. "You were never really part of this family anyway." I was 19 years old. My mother had been dead for 6 hours. But before I tell you what happened 8 years later when that same aunt stood at my door with her hands shaking and her pride finally cracked open, let me take you back to a small town in Georgia called Millbrook, where I learned that some families love their children and some families only love what those children can prove. My name is Reese Dalton. I grew up in Millbrook, Georgia. A town so small that the gas station and the post office shared a parking lot, and everybody knew your grandmother's maiden name. It was the kind of place that felt safe from the outside and suffocating from the inside, where family reputation meant everything and the truth meant considerably less. My mother, Joanna Dalton, was the quiet one in her family. She had 3 sisters, Patricia, the oldest, who ran everything, Donna, the middle one, who agreed with everything Patricia said, and Carol, the youngest, who was too afraid to disagree with anyone. My mother was somewhere in between all of them, softer than Patricia, smarter than Donna. She passed away on a Tuesday morning in October. I was holding her hand. The window was open and the air smelled like Georgia in the fall, pine and wood smoke and something sweet I have never been able to name. I called Patricia to tell her. She arrived too braver than Carol, and therefore trusted by none of them. I did not cry. I was too empty to cry. I just stood there and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not grief, something quieter and more permanent than either. A decision taking shape without words. I was not going to let this be the ending. The lawyer I found was not expensive and not in Millbrook. I drove 40 minutes to a town called Carver, and sat across from a woman named Helen Marsh who had short gray hair and reading glasses and a directness that reminded me of my mother. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. "Did your mother ever write anything down? Letters, notes, emails, anything stating her intentions?" I thought about it. I thought about my mother's Sunday mornings with her budget notebook. Her careful, precise, documented approach to everything in her life. "I'll look," I said. I went back to the house. Patricia had not yet arranged to have me removed, perhaps assuming I would simply leave, and I went through every drawer, every shelf, every folder in the filing cabinet my mother kept in the closet. Helen had told me what to look for. Anything dated, anything signed, anything in my mother's handwriting that expressed her intentions. I found 3 things. The first was a letter dated 14 months before her death, addressed to me, that began, "Reese, I am writing this on a good day because I want to make sure that if there are bad days ahead, you will know clearly what I want." She described each piece of jewelry and stated explicitly that it was to go to me. She signed and dated it. The second was an email she had sent to Helen Marsh's firm, a different attorney there, now retired, 8 months before her death, asking about the process of formalizing a will. The email contained a detailed list of her possessions and her stated wishes for each one. The third was a page torn from her budget notebook, the one she kept on the kitchen counter, with a single sentence written at the bottom in her careful handwriting, below a column of numbers. "Everything I have built is for Reese. She earned it by staying." I sat on the kitchen floor and held those 3 pieces of paper and felt my mother in every word. Helen Marsh said it was enough to contest. The process took 9 months. Patricia hired a local attorney who used words like informal and unverified and family consensus. Helen used words like documented intent and estate fraud and conversion of property. The jewelry was returned. The china was returned. The toolbox was returned. And Patricia was required by court order to pay my legal fees. I want to tell you about the day the judgment came through because it was nothing like I had imagined. I had spent 9 months imagining something dramatic, confrontation, tears, some moment of visible reckoning where Patricia's composure cracked and the truth landed in the room like a stone through glass. What actually happened was that Helen called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was at work and said, "It's done. In your favor. Full recovery plus fees." I was standing in a break room in Atlanta where I had been working for 2 years at an accounting firm. I said thank you and hung up and stood there for a long moment looking at the coffee machine. Then I went back to my desk and finished the report I had been working on. Justice, I had learned, does not arrive with music. It arrives like any other fact, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, requiring you to simply receive it and continue. What came after was the part one had not prepared for. Patricia called me 3 weeks after the judgment. Not to apologize, I want to be clear about that. She called because Tyler, her baseball scholarship son, had made a series of financial decisions that had unraveled badly. He had invested money in something that didn't exist. He had borrowed from people who expected to be paid back. He had called his mother from a city 3 states away asking for help that Patricia, for the first time in her life, did not have to give. She told me this with the particular discomfort of a woman who has spent 50 years being the one people ask for help and is now for the first time doing the asking. She used the words family and blood and what your mother would have wanted with the fluency of someone who had never once stopped to consider what my mother actually wanted. I let her finish. Then I said very calmly, "Aunt Patricia, do you remember what you said to me in my mother's kitchen the day of her funeral? About her knowing I couldn't handle real responsibility." Silence. "I've thought about that sentence for 8 years, I said. "I thought about it when I found her letters. I thought about it in the lawyer's office. I thought about it every time I balanced my books on a Sunday morning the way she taught me to. I thought about it when I paid off my student loans and when I got my CPA license and when I bought my own house last year with the down payment I saved myself." More silence. "I'm not going to help with Tyler's situation," I said. "Not because I don't feel sorry for him, I do. But because you stood in her kitchen and told me she knew I was limited, and I need you to understand that you were wrong. About her. About me. About all of it." I heard Patricia exhale. It was a long, complicated exhale, the sound of a woman who has built an entire identity around being the authority and is feeling that identity shift. "Reese," she started. "I hope Tyler finds a way through this," I said. "I genuinely do. But I'm not the resource for it. Take care of yourself, Patricia." I hung up. I sat in my living room for a long time afterward. Outside my window, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in the early evening. Traffic noise, someone's radio, the specific low hum of a city that does not stop for anyone's private reckoning. I thought about my mother. About her 3 gold rings and her budget notebook and her Sunday mornings and the way she squeezed my hand under the table at family dinners when the people who should have seen her looked through her instead. I thought about the toolbox. It was sitting in my kitchen now, the same place her toolbox had always sat. I had used it 2 weeks ago to fix a loose cabinet hinge, the same kind of small, quiet repair she had spent my whole childhood making. I had knelt on the kitchen floor with the screwdriver in my hand and thought about her so clearly it felt like she was in the room. I thought about the last thing she wrote in her budget notebook. She earned it by staying. I am 27 years old now. I live in Atlanta in a house I own, with a porch that faces east and catches the morning light. I am a licensed CPA with my own small practice. I have 3 clients I love and 2 I am still deciding about. I have a savings account I review every Sunday morning with coffee, in a notebook on my kitchen counter the way she taught me. I have her jewelry. The 3 gold rings sit in a small dish on my dresser. The pearl earrings I wear on days when I need to feel her near me. The diamond pendant I wore to the closing on my house because it felt like the right occasion, the kind of thing she would have understood without explanation. I have her toolbox. It is scratched and heavy and completely irreplaceable. I did not speak to Patricia again after that phone call. I heard through Carol, the youngest, the quiet one, who called me 6 months later with a nervousness in her voice that told me the call had taken her some courage, that Patricia had managed to help Tyler partially, that things were difficult, that the family had been through a hard year. Carol also said something I did not expect. She said, "I should have said something when she took those things from your mother's house." I was standing right there and I didn't say anything, and I've thought about it ever since. I told her I appreciated her saying so. I told her I did not need an apology, but I was glad she offered one. We talked for 40 minutes. It was the longest conversation I had ever had with my Aunt Carol and the most honest one. People surprise you. Sometimes too late, sometimes exactly on time. What I know is this. My mother spent her whole life being underestimated by people who should have known better. She was the quiet one, the unmarried one, the one who lived in the smaller house and drove the older car and raised a daughter alone without complaint. She was treated like a footnote in her own family's story. But she documented everything. She kept her books on Sunday mornings. She wrote letters on good days so the bad days couldn't erase what was true. She left behind, in 3 pieces of paper in a filing cabinet, everything I needed to prove that she knew exactly what she was doing and exactly who she trusted to carry it forward. She was never the footnote. She was the whole story. And she made sure I could prove it. I fix things in my house with her toolbox on weekend mornings, and I think about her hands on the same handles, fixing the same kinds of small breaks. I think about what it means to maintain something. A home, a life, a sense of your own worth, in the face of people who are constantly suggesting that you are not quite enough. She was always enough. She was more than enough. And she left me every tool I needed to know that I am too. If you have ever been told by someone in your own family that you were not quite enough, I want you to know they were measuring you with the wrong ruler. Find the people who see you clearly. Document everything. And build something so solid that when the people who underestimated you finally understand what they missed, you are already too far ahead to look back.